First, I'd like to thank you, Justin, for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful venture. I can't imagine anything better for our children than for us to gather and to strengthen each other at a time when there's a very good chance that we will have never needed it more. I don't think there's anybody in America more important, with the exception, the obvious exception of the people that are saving lives at the hospitals every day. But after those people, I believe our coaches and our teachers are the most important. I think our young people are going to remember what you do and say, and remember the creative ways that you find to connect with them and with each other. So I'm blessed to be here today, and I'm so happy to share with you. Now, this is the law of the jungle, as old and as true as the sky. And the wolf that shall keep it may prosper, and the wolf that shall break it must die. As the creeper girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back. The strength of the pack is the wolf. The strength of the wolf is the pack. That's what we're doing here today. Rudyard Kipling, I'm not a poet, and frankly, I haven't learned a lot of poems in my life. But I understand Kipling, and Kipling understood the jungle. And Kipling understood the wolf and the pack, and how much we need each other. And what happens when you don't join the pack? What happens when your ego outstrips the needs of the community? And as football coaches, our greatest teaching comes from the words that you're seeing on the screen right now: tolerance, diversity, and respect in athletics. What I'm going to present today is the basics. I was a lineman for 20 years. I wanted to pitch for the Yankees. I didn't see any reason in the world that if I could stand 60 feet 6 inches from you and throw something at you, why in the world would I want to run into you and risk injuring my little puffy, chubby, out of shape body? Only one thing kept me out of the majors in baseball, and that was talent. So I did get to play in Yankee Stadium a couple of times, but it wasn't with a round ball. It was when the Giants were playing there, and the Baltimore Colts went in to play them. I didn't play football very well because I was too excited about where I was. But what happened to me in the sport of football is one of the greatest aspects of my life, and I like to share that because it's not just a function of tolerance. Once you step into the huddle, nobody wants to be just tolerated. Nobody just wants to be okay in the room. Everybody wants to earn one's place on the team in the huddle. Since we don't huddle anymore, I've had started going to the locker room and in the stands. People say, well, what are you going to do about your huddle thing? The name of the book is The 10 Men You Meet in the Huddle, and we don't ever huddle anymore. Well, we still dress together. We still have to pull each other's jerseys over our pads. In our sport, we can't even get our shirts on without each other in that locker room. And what we learned very early, regardless of the color of our skin, is that sweat smells the same on everybody. And the strength of the pack is indeed our strength, and vice versa. And we are the strength of the pack. We learn to love each other, and it lasts the rest of our lives. And I lost one of the greatest friends and influences in my history, my 77-year-old history. I lost Willie Davis yesterday. Now I'll speak about the great man at length in a moment. A picture of the globe is appropriate with a thumbprint and the indication that of all the 7 billion people on the earth today, there's not another one like you. Now, I was a coach and a youth worker at the same time, so I'm going to do a youth worker thing, and I ask you to cooperate with me. Take a look at your hand. Just study the striations and the lines and understand this. If we could do fingerprints of every human being on earth today, all 7 billion, there wouldn't be another set like the one you're looking at. God made you unique, and there's nobody else like you. Etched in stone at the exit to the Baylor School in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is the word MAGNANIMITAS. And as I worked there a couple of years, as I drove out the premises daily, I began to wonder, what's that giant Latin word? I wasn't very good at Latin. So I asked somebody, and I was very impressed at the answer. Dr. Roy Baylor, the founder of the school 100 years ago, in his last communication with his students, gave them this word and said, if I were to choose one word to guide your future, it would be from the Latin, and it would be magnanimitas, 12 letters, 5 syllables, one word. It means greatness of spirit, and you have it. Every single one of you has it. What you do with it is up to you. Your greatness of spirit. You may become a great theologian, a great philanthropist. You may be a great coach or a teacher or a great student athlete. You may be a scientist. You may be a lot of things, but you'll never be the human being that God made you to be until you locate your magnanimitas, your greatness of spirit, develop it, and give it to a cause greater than yourself. Football is one way to do that. And you and I both know it's everything in our sport. Magnanimitas, greatness of spirit. You are the sum of the moments, experiences, and the decisions of your life. And it's very complex. The permutations and the combinations of each one of us is almost impossible to calculate, as we are learning again and again today with a virus that we're struggling to understand. And I want you to spend some special time today and every day thinking about who the influences are that helped mold your magnanimitas, and then whose magnanimitas have you helped to mold in turn? How many people have you passed along the blessing or the curse of those that have touched you and made you or helped make you who you are? Those influences come from all ages, races, and religions, whether you like it or not in today's world, often where you least expect it. We can't get bunched together in our little cloisters. A lot of people try to and live separated in gated communities or behind walls or armed or however they choose to separate from others that they have somehow decided are inferior. It doesn't work in the world today. We all are touched by each other, and it happens all the time. So you may not like it, but you're going to deal with it. And football, again, is a great teacher of that reality. Some of those that touched my magnanimitas were very, very famous. I heard these words late on a weeknight in Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1965. I had been drafted in the 20th round. The NFL had 20 rounds in the draft in those days, and I had been selected 20th and last by the Green Bay Packers. They were already being called the greatest team in the history of professional sport, not the greatest team in the history of football, the greatest team in the history of professional sport, all sports, they were being called. We were in the middle of the civil rights movement. There was rioting in the cities. The Packers were to win 3 more world titles in a row starting that year. And again, they were already being called the greatest team ever. I had a problem because I was from 1,000 miles south. I was white. I had never been in a huddle with an African-American person. Vince Lombardi had a lot of strong suits, but the one he does not get enough credit for is that he would not tolerate racism. He would not accept any form of prejudice. We had more African-American players on that team, I believe, than any other team in the league. Other teams had quotas, or they had no African-American players, and they bragged about it. And we beat them to death every Sunday. And I used to wonder, are they going to figure this out? Lombardi doesn't get credit for the absence of racial prejudice, but I'll guarantee you the men in that locker room understood one thing: everybody is respected here. Henry Jordan said it best. He treated us all the same, like dogs. And he did. He was hard. He was demanding. Sometimes he was brutal, but he was fair. and he cared about us, and he told us the truth. I couldn't handle him very well, but I desperately wanted to be on that team. I just didn't know how to relate to African American people, and I thought they're going to hear my Southern accent, injure me, and send me home, and I don't blame them. The most intimidating of all, and by the way, those guys we had were people like Herb Adderley, Willie Wood, Lionel Aldridge, David Robinson. Most of them are in the Hall of Fame now. The most intimidating of all was the great Willie Davis, future Hall of Famer, defensive end from Grambling State University, working on his master's degree in business at the University of Chicago while being captain of the greatest football team of all time. I was walking out of the dorm one night. Oh, and another thing, we're in Wisconsin. It's August. It's 46 degrees. That ain't right. Everything about it was alien and strange. And the last thing in the world I wanted was to call my girl and say, they have cut me. They have let me go. And as I walked out of the dorm, feeling sorry for myself, wallowing in self-pity, this voice came out of the darkness from behind me. Bill? I thought it was God. I just collapsed in the grass. It was Willie Davis. He said, I've been watching you, young man, and I'd like to speak to you. And I thought, oh, no, he's going to tell me to get lost. And I don't blame him. He said, I like your effort. I think you got a chance to make our team, and I'm going to help you. I said, you're going to help me? He said, yeah. He told me about one of his big disappointments is when the young Packer team had lost to the Eagles in the world title game in 1960. It was the second year for Vince Lombardi. It was the only playoff game Lombardi ever lost. If you check the records, Lombardi's playoff record is by far the best in the history of the NFL. He was 9-1 in playoff games. This was the one he lost. And Willie said, I was a young player and I left that field in Philadelphia and I looked out there and I saw newspapers and popcorn boxes blowing around, but there was more than newspaper on that field, Bill. There were regrets. I left regrets because I didn't give my very best, and I made up my mind in that instant. This will never happen to Willie Davis again. I will never leave regrets on the football field. And Bill, you come on our practice field tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day and leave no regrets, and you just might make our team. And when you're trying to block Ray Nitschke and he's tearing your head off, which he did, and Lombardi's screaming profanity in your face, and he did, and he said, you think you're going to croak or you're going to start crying or you're going to quit, you come find me. Man, I'll get you through it. I'll get you through it. You know what we call him? We call him Dr. Feelgood. So sure enough, Nitschke tore my head off. He broke my face mask and broke my nose the first day. That was the first day. Lombardi screamed that profanity in my face, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And sure enough, I'd go run find number 87 on the defensive field. I'd say, how you feel, old man? He'd say, feel good, man, feel good. You can do it. You can do it. We call him Dr. Feelgood. So what had the great man done for the terrified white kid? He didn't just help me to play for 10 years in the National Football League and get a bunch of Super Bowl rings. He changed my life. I was transformed. I was never able to look at anybody in the same way I had because of an unexpected, undeserved, unrewarded act of kindness from a great man. I am eternally indebted to you, Willie. Rest in peace, man. Every thought, every action we have helps shape our ultimate destiny. So there are going to be people that go through this dark time with this disease, and they're going to be destroyed by it, whether they get the disease or not, because they're going to let the negativity and some of the leadership in this nation right now get to them. There are going to be others that rally and get stronger by the day and find ways and make creativity a reality in their lives, and they're going to share that with their student athletes. They're going to share that with their students if they don't happen to be coaches. And we're still in the category of the famous people that have influenced me, but there was a German philosopher named Goethe. funny pronunciation for that name. But he wrote this: sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. Every thought you have influences the human being you are going to become. And by extension, those you influence just as readily will become that which you inject into their young minds. You choose your response. Dr. Viktor Frankl survived 6 years in Auschwitz as a Jew. He was a sophisticated doctor. Nevertheless, the Nazis took him and operated on him without benefit of anesthetics. And he took that experience and made it into a whole form of psychotherapy that he called logotherapy. And he wrote a great book called Man's Search for Meaning. I recommend it. He was another life changer for me because he learned in that circumstance, no matter what, he said, I discovered a kind of freedom that my captors would never even understand. And the last freedom of a human being, no matter the circumstances, is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. He did that. He lived to write and teach about it. And once again, lives were changed. His magnanimitas was spread worldwide. Some of the people that influenced me the most were not so famous. My high school coach, Bill Badgett, there he is to this day, the most intimidating presence in the history of the world, especially to that 180-pound center over there with the bad stance. Can you imagine trying to pass protect out of that stance? Coach Badgett hammered into our sensibilities, our very fragile sensibilities, over and over every day. Man, football is just like life. Football is just life marked off in 100 yards in 10-yard increments. You get knocked down, you get up. You get knocked down, you get up. And when I would get run over, he'd say, run it again. And he'd say, run it again. And he'd say, run it again. Tackle the guy, Bill. When I was 16 years old and had a couple of years of football, so I had gotten a little bit tougher, I had the privilege of going to work in a construction crew. And I was told by the developer, who was my American Legion baseball coach, Mr. Scruggs, he said, now, I want you to pay attention to your supervisor and do exactly what he says. So I show up for the job. This is 1959. And I got an African-American supervisor. And I remember thinking, well, I mean, we're not supposed to, I mean, he's not supposed to be the boss, is he? Well, his name was James Harvey. And I wish I could find James. We had to take a picture. We just had to, that's not really a picture of James. I wish it were. But there was James with his big forearms, spotless bib overalls on, big gold tooth, big smile. And after about 5 days of toting sheetrock and bricks and concrete and digging ditches, I realized that this guy was a real boss and that he loved me and that he was going to show me how to do things so that I could get a job the rest of my life. But not everybody on the job felt that way. And there were some carpenters who sort of looked down their nose that James was the only African-American presence on the job. One day, we're standing up at the framing. We're bringing floor joists up for the carpenters. There were 2 white boys, Bob Scruggs and me. And James had brought us up there. One of the carpenters, and there was a water bucket with a ladle. James was standing next to the water bucket. One of the guys turned and said, hey, boy, get me some water. Now, there were 2 boys standing there, Bob and me. But James was the one standing closest to the water. He had a little bit of a speech impediment. And he wasn't an educated man, but he was a brilliant man, as we were to learn that day. James didn't move, never stopped smiling. This guy's hammering away, and he turns and looks over his shoulder and says, hey, boy, did you hear me? Give me some water. Now, James was the only person on the premises that would not have been allowed to drink from the water bucket and yet he was expected to respond to that command and get water for this other guy. So finally, James, who never stopped smiling, folded those big forearms in front of him, and he said, well, how old does a man have to be before he's not a boy? Now, I want you to know all the hammering stopped. It was like one of those scenes out of a Western movie. The guy looked at James' forearms, looked at his skinny arms, and he did an incredible thing. He said, I'm sorry, James, I'll get my own water. So we're walking out across the yard, and I said, James, are those guys going to harm you? They're going to hurt you? He said, no, we don't worry none about that, Bill. We just go ahead on. Nobody called James boy the rest of the year on that job. I learned a great lesson. You make the decisions that change your life. He literally risked his life to prove that he was not going to be called boy when he was 33 years old. Now, you could argue about whether that was a smart thing or not, but I'll guarantee you it sure changed my life again, and probably had a lot to do with the fact that I could respond to Willie Davis 6 years later. At Georgia Tech, in my fourth year, I had not started a game, and I went to one of our coaches and I said, now again, we're in the area of the people that are not so famous. John Robert Bell should be, James should be. I went to one of the coaches and said, why am I not playing? He said, because you're not good enough and you'll never be good enough. So forget about it. Don't worry about it. Get your education and be a nice boy. This coach, John Robert Bell, it wasn't 2 days later, he came to my locker and he looked me in the eye and he said, Bill, I know you can play. So let's you and me go to practice early. Let's do some extra work because I think I know some things that'll help you. So when I played 12 more years and played in 4 world championship games, who do you think I was thinking about? And I was privileged to go and thank Coach Bell personally many times. It changed my life because he took the trouble to look inside and see something that other people couldn't see. And indeed, I couldn't see it. So every one of you have opportunities to provide those vital moments that shape the lives of everybody around you. You are a primary sculptor. Young people are going to remember what you do, especially at this time. So beware of, I've got one of my former players does these PowerPoints. I don't know where he found this guy. I said, just find somebody to fit. There's a group that we call the Fellowship of the Miserable. The Fellowship of the Miserable is that group of people that can't wait to tell you what a rotten day it's going to be and how you're not going to ever make it and you're never going to do anything well and that you deserve to get fired. And I know the FO, we refer to them as the FOM. And after I educated my teams and we took the practice field and somebody would shout out, hey, coach, nobody's in the FOM today. I knew we were going to have good practices. Fellowship wants to see you fail because if you succeed and beat the odds, if you overcome the fact that maybe you're a little too small, or maybe you're not quite as quick as you ought to be, or maybe you're not as tall as you ought to be, if you do that, then you point out to them the pathetic results of what they do because they don't want to take the risk of trying to see if they can make it. So we end up with a situation best described for me by a poem written by a guy named James Patrick Talley called The Cold Within. 6 men were trapped by circumstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. The dying fire in need of wood, the first man held his back, for of the faces round the fire he noticed one was black. The second man saw not one of his own local church. He could not bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. The poor man sat in tattered clothes and gave his coat a hitch. Why should he give up his stick of wood to warm the idle rich? The rich man sat and thought of all the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. The black man's face spoke revenge, and the fire passed from his sight. He saw in his stick of wood a chance to spite the white. The last man of this forlorn group did not accept for gain, only to those that gave to him was how he played the game. Their logs gripped tight in death's still grasp was proof of human sin. They died, not from the cold without. They died from the cold within. They died, not from the cold without. They died from the cold within. Now, let me ask you, folks, a rhetorical question this morning. I'm going to skip by some numbers. What would have happened if Abraham Lincoln, and yesterday was the anniversary of his date of his death as well as the loss of Willie Davis. And by the way, the author of that poem was James Patrick Kenny. I said the wrong. James Patrick Kenny was the guy's name. But suppose Abraham Lincoln had been seated at the dying fire. What if Nelson Mandela had been seated at the dying fire? What if Eleanor Roosevelt or Jackie Robinson or Mohandas Gandhi had been seated at the dying fire? And those others across the screen at the bottom. You know what would have happened? Everybody would have lived. Everybody would have prospered. Because what great people do when all appears to be lost is to throw their log on the fire and to say, when you're having a bad day, when you don't think you can take it, when there's blood everywhere and Ray Nitschke's tearing your head off, you come find me and I'll get you through it. I'll get you through it. That's what they say. So back by the numbers, we have 5 priorities: faith, family, winning football, education. I got those out of order. Education, then football, and then fun. And all those should be provided for. I love this picture. That's how we can be as young people. The educational piece, my college coach taught us at Georgia Tech. We got one advantage now. He'd say, these big old guys are bigger than we are. They're stronger than they are. That we're faster than we are. We only have one advantage. You see, we're smarter than they are. And the incredible thing is that we were stupid enough to believe that. But we did. And he used that to his advantage because he understood field position. He understood turnovers before other people did. If we played field position properly and we didn't turn the ball over, we always had a chance. And then he said somewhere late in the fourth quarter, because we're smarter than they are, because we're in better shape, they're going to get tired and they're going to make a mistake. And when that happens, I'm going to think of something and we'll beat them. And that's what usually happened. Coach Dodd. And then one day he confessed to the team. He said, look, y'all wonder why I hammer about education. He said, my record as a quarterback at the University of Tennessee was 27-1, but I do not have a diploma from that school. And that is not going to happen to you. So he made sure we attended class and sat on the front row. And the only reason I graduated from Georgia Tech was because my football coach loved me too much to allow me to self-destruct. Great poem penned by Theodore Roosevelt. I'm not going to sit here and recite it, but I learned it a long time ago, and I learned it because Bart Starr recited it at a touchdown club in Houston, Texas. I had picked him up, driven him to the event. I had torn up my knee, so I was in a cast with crutches, and I was feeling sorry for myself. The great Bart Starr stood up and said, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out where the strong man stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by the dust, the sweat, and the blood. And you've probably read it many times, but I recommend it for this time so that you can draw strength from a great human being who understood dealing with horrific adversity in his own life and led our country in a powerful, positive way, in an honorable way. The miracle of the huddle. What happens in the huddle and in the locker room? I can go to South Central Los Angeles and recruit a big old tough guy, and I can go to the hills of North Georgia and recruit a big old tough guy, and they can come in my office, as has happened, and they can say to me, I'm not dressing next to this guy. I don't like him, because they were both taught by our sick culture to hate each other, because they come from different music and different culture and different churches and different skin pigmentation and different backgrounds. And something in our culture got in their heads that they're supposed to hate each other. I've even had them say to me, I'm not dressing next to this guy. I said, oh, yes, you are. He said, you can't make me do that. I said, I can make you do anything you want to. Your choice is you can go home if you want to, but you're going to dress next to this guy. And I have watched through the years with my heart fulfilled as those two young people go from what they think of as hatred, and they learn to love each other because they find out that sweat smells the same. When they get busted in the mouth on the practice field, and I look at my brother, we find out that that blood is the same color. And those friendships last the rest of our lives, don't they? That's what matters about football. That's winning in the fourth quarter. That's taking on the Nazis as the Dutch resistance did. And what I love about the Dutch resistance, and the reason you see Hendrik Kramer and his guys pictured here, is because he came up with one of the great mottos, and a great friend of mine named Ron Greer gave it to me. If we know who we are, we'll know what to do. If you know who you are, you'll know what to do. You know who you are today? Figure it out. You choose. You choose. Coach Lombardi wasn't perfect, and I thought he was a hypocrite when he said your religion, your family, and the Green Bay Packers, but he was not a hypocrite. He was a man of his word, and he lived those priorities, and that's the reason for the record, and that was the reason for a lot of things. The greatest halftime speech I ever heard was delivered by Lombardi my rookie year. We were in Detroit, and the Lions were the only team in the league that were not intimidated by the Packers. They were certainly not, with Alex Karras and Joe Schmidt, Night Train Lane, some of those guys. They were trash talking before there was trash talk, and they were kicking our butts all over the field. It was 21-3 at the half. And one of the Detroit players came by Coach Lombardi and sneered at him and said, hey, how you like that, you fat? He said some other things that I will not use here in this format. How you like that, you fat wop? And I turned, thinking that Vince Lombardi would strike him dead with a bolt of lightning. I really did. And Lombardi smiled. I couldn't make any sense out of that. And then we ran in for the halftime, and we're all terrified at what even the big guys, even the veterans, even the future Hall of Famers were afraid. I could sense it because of what Lombardi could do with his verbiage. He didn't come in for the half. He didn't show up. Now, the NFL halftime is 12 minutes. It seemed like an eternity that day. But he'd been standing in the dugout because we were playing at old Tiger Stadium, baseball stadium. And with about 30 seconds left in the halftime, he walks in, looks around the room, establishes eye contact with every man in the room. And here was the halftime speech. Men, we're the Green Bay Packers. And he turned on his heel and walked out. Now I'll let you guess what happened in the second half. We ran them out of their own stadium. And why did Coach Lombardi smile when the big defensive tackle sneered in his face and cursed him? He smiled because he knew that Detroit thought the game was over. And he knew that the game was not over. And why did he not have to get in the locker room and yell, your religion, your family, and the Green Bay Packers, and fatigue make cowards of us all, and we're number one? The reason he didn't have to yell those things is because he taught them patiently and loudly and repeatedly all day, every day, all year, every year, and we knew who we were. That's the gift that each of us has. Each of us within earshot of this broadcast knows exactly how to do that, if only we will. No matter what the time is, no matter what the technology is required, to teach our people, male, female, black, white, rich, poor, spread out together, regardless of the circumstances. We can do that. And when that happens, we never lose that competitive zeal. And we can smile when other people are laughing at us. And we can be kind to those who do not deserve it. And that's exactly what we ought to do. We can understand that the fellowship of the miserable is mostly terrified of folks that beat the odds. And the reason is, as I told you, because they're afraid that you're going to show up their feeble efforts. And that's not our intention, but that's what happens. The 5 traits of a champion. Here again, I've had an argument with my former player he's a whole lot smarter than I. He was a president scholar at Georgia Tech. His name is Pete Welburn. He's a great walk-on player for us, and he's one of the top 10 young attorneys in America. But I think I added a number 1, which is to show up. He said, no, I don't like that. So when he does a PowerPoint for me, he's been a teacher of computers and such at Georgia Tech. So I don't get to have every single thing I want on a PowerPoint. But number 1 for me is show up. When I think about the great people, the Willie Davises and the Vince Lombardis and the Don Shulas and the Johnny Unitas and the Bart Starrs and the John Mackeys, when I think hard about those people, when I think about their characteristics, the first thing that pops in my mind, I can't remember one of them ever being late for anything, ever. They show up on time. They show up on time, and they show up ready to go to work. They show up ready to compete. They show up ready with their assignments. And that is why they're in the Hall of Fame. That is why they are the champions that they are. The second characteristic in my little list is singleness of purpose. He didn't even like my word, so he likes singularity of purpose. There's such focus. The human eye, like the human brain, has the capacity to find focus or space focus. If a lineman comes down the line of scrimmage and he's going to try to make a block on a screen, and a corner comes screaming up with his full force speed, and the lineman space focuses and just looks at the player and tries to get a shot on that corner, he's not going to touch him. But if the lineman fine focuses, and if the lineman has practiced his footwork some, and he fine focuses on the belt buckle of that corner and keeps his head up and comes under control, then he's going to get a piece of that corner. And the back's going to have a way to break it off and make a long run. Fine focus is crucial. Champions have the capacity to find focus in a heartbeat, and they can do it over and over and over. Number 3, champions are unselfish. Champions are unselfish. Champions will play any position, anytime on the team to help the team. Champions will cover kickoffs. Champions will dive over piles, will do anything to help win a game. And I'm running out of my self-imposed time here, and the third one should speak for itself. But when I say toughness, I'm not just talking about getting your pads down on the goal line, although that's certainly critical. Toughness is taking responsibility. Leaders take responsibility. Leaders that are tough take responsibility for their unit and for their performance. Toughness is taking responsibility for your teammates and helping your teammates when they are suffering. Toughness is being the human being that others can look up to because you tell the truth. Toughness is being honorable in all circumstances. Number 5 or 4 on this list is intelligence, yes, but I'm not talking about IQ points. I'm talking about smart, being game smart, being ready. My first week with the Baltimore Colts, Shula's practices and training camp were twice as hard as Lombardi. I couldn't believe it. We're on the field 5.5 hours, 2 practices, both in pads, 3 practices if you were a long snapper, which I was. and I'm trudging up the hill feeling sorry for myself, trying to take a shower, trying to stop sweating, no air conditioning, 97 degrees in Westminster, Maryland, trying to get my clothes on, sticking to my back. I'm walking back out. It's getting dark. I look down the practice field. There's somebody that's still down there. An hour after practice, after the last practice. Guess who it is? It's Johnny Unitas and Raymond Berry. One pass cut after another. Flies, digs, posts, curls, corners. It was Raymond's 13th year in the league. It was Unitas's 12th. Unitas was most valuable player in the league for the third time that year. It was not because of natural ability. It was because he out-prepared. Raymond out-prepared. The great ones all, the great coaches, the great players all out-prepare the opposition. The great players and coaches do things that the opposition is not willing to do. Every single one of the great ones do that. The fifth is the most important, and I'm going to finish up with this. And, here's where Pete Welburn did a number on me. It's easy to quit, but you don't. And if you don't know who that is, you need to study your football. That was what I saw at a moment when I thought, well, maybe I ought to quit, but nah, I can't. That's Dick Butkus, my nemesis. I had Butkus twice a year. Nice guy off the field, but shall we say challenging on the field. And I'm going to close with this. Two pains in life. This is what Willie Davis taught me too. The pain of discipline, the pain of regret. You choose. And when I'm playing in my 23rd football game in a row and I have not missed a single play, and there's 1:12 on the clock and we got one timeout, we got 80 yards to go, we're 4 points behind, we got to have a touchdown. I'm not thinking about a Super Bowl ring. I'm not thinking about being all pro. I'm not thinking about being a hero. I'm thinking about one thing. I want one thing. And it's the same thing I wanted when I was 12 years old. I want to quit. I want to quit. I want to go suck on the oxygen. Well, in our sport, in football, you don't have to leave the field to quit. All you got to do is turn your shoulders. Let this big dude run back and do what he does to quarterbacks. And nobody would know, right? Wrong. That magnanimitas, that greatness of spirit, that little flame that never flickers deep inside says, don't you dare. You're not quitting. You suck it up. You keep your pads square. You bend your knees. You move your feet. You do your job. Then you look at the poor son of a gun next to you, and you know what he's going to do because you've been there with him so many times. And you've got your motivation. You cannot let him down. We cannot let our children down in this moment in our country. We cannot let our country down, folks. It's too important. We need to take our magnanimitas and join it. And if we were together physically, I would have you join hands just like a great huddle would. I wish we could do that. But figuratively, let's join hands and let's make up our minds that we're going to be the champions that we were made to be, that our magnanimitas is going to shine and change lives. God bless you. Thanks for letting me participate, Justin.
No, Coach, absolutely. And I know earlier you had mentioned about, you wouldn't mind questions being asked throughout, but I almost felt it would have been criminal to cut you off, man. I mean, it was incredible. I had chills many times throughout the presentation, and I did open up the chat if anybody has questions now. If you have a few minutes, Coach, to answer a few questions. But yeah, like I said, I thought it would have been wrong to even interrupt you at all, Coach.
Thank you. I've got all day.
Here's a question here, Coach. What is some advice you would give to a young leadership developer or coach?
More than ever, get to know each of your people. When I say get to know them, I mean listen. One of my great weaknesses is that I want to talk all the time. And like this sign says, this slide right here, Nobody wants to be tolerated. We want to be loved. Um, and I'm not talking about you got to walk around hugging each other all the time. It's okay to hug, but I mean, if you look somebody in the eye and listen, um, and pay attention and take notes and know what their experience has been, it will change their lives. You will be able to change their lives, and it will change your life. So that's the first order of business, I think. And when I think back and think things that I wish I had done better, I thought I was doing this well, but I didn't do it nearly as well as I should have, especially where you have numbers. And especially in this circumstance that we're in right now, you'd have to do it with the phone, but getting to know and listening to their frustrations and their ambitions and their feelings and what are they really like. So when you are with them again, you can take them aside and put your arm around them and say, okay, you're going to be able to do this and I'm going to help you, but it's going to take everything you got to do it. And remember what we talked about back in the summer when we were going through that tough time. That's a starting place.
Absolutely. Another question for you, Coach. What are some books that have helped you grow in your leadership and growth?
That book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, what he endured, what he went through, and the way he does it, he doesn't wallow in self-pity and say, gee, woe is me, look what happened to me. It's unbelievable how he came out of that, and made me realize that I always had a choice. When I got cut from a team or I got traded and I felt like it was unfair, well, what are you going to do about it? It's up to you. You choose two pains in life, the pain of discipline, the pain of regret. So we get to choose the discipline, and Frankl certainly did that. There's a great book called Moral Courage, and it's really, it's by a guy named Rushworth Kidder. He studied he and the Institute for Global Ethics, he studied the values that are treasured in every single culture on earth, every religion, every race, every political system. Everybody agrees on these 5 values, and he did this scientifically. He's got studies to prove it and did the surveys. Honesty, fairness, respect, responsibility, compassion. Honesty, fairness, respect, responsibility, compassion. And when you have those 5 values, invariably, then there's a 6th reality, and it's called trust. And when you have that, you can have a great team, no matter whether it's a political team, a football team, a volleyball team, or whatever it is. So Moral Courage is the name of the book, and he writes about the research they did, and he tells the story of the courageous people that risked their lives to make changes that needed to be changed. There's a great biography of Vince Lombardi called When Pride Still Mattered by David Marinus. That's a great football book. I couldn't, even though I had played for him, I couldn't put the thing down. And there are a lot of those. There's a great leadership book called Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote it about Lincoln, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. And I know it sounds like a strictly political book, but it was really about Lincoln and his incredible, he pulled together this cabinet of people, most of whom hated his guts. And he hired them because they were great at what they did. He didn't get hung up on personality and whether somebody liked him. He didn't care if somebody liked him. He cared if they could do the job. That's the essence of her book, and she's a great historian. I'm leaving out something on that. That'll come to me in a minute, but that's another Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. That's another great book. And I could go on and on because I read all the time. Kipling's Jungle Books, even though he wrote them for young people, even old people. I enjoyed them when I was 15 years old. I enjoyed them now I'm 77 years
old. Coach, would you mind putting back up the 5 traits of a champion slide? Coach just wanted to take a picture of it. There you go.
Don't forget, you can't do any of those if you don't show up on time. This is an argument I lost with my former player who created this.
I agree with you, Coach. Gotta show up, man. Let me see what other questions are here. Coach wants to know just all the quarterbacks you had worked with in your playing career.
What quarterbacks have I worked with?
Yeah, all the quarterbacks.
Oh my gosh.
Or that you snapped to in your playing career, he said.
Have we got a bunch of old people out there that will know these names? Maybe there'll be some. Shocking thing, I didn't want to be a center, of course. I had been a pitcher in baseball, and I wanted to play something other than, nobody wanted to play center. And I ended up playing center every day for 20 years. And I just wanted to be known that our footballs were always properly inflated at all times. So I ended up hiking the ball to Billy Lothridge, who was a Heisman runner-up at Georgia Tech. And in the Senior Bowl that year, I snapped the ball to Joe Willie Namath. And a few months later, in the All-Star game, I snapped the ball to Roger Staubach and John Hewitt, Heisman Trophy winner. Both Heisman Trophy winners, Bob Timberlake and Craig Morton. And the week after that, I started hiking the ball to Bart Starr and Zeke Bratkowski. And a couple of years later to John Unitas and Earl Morrill. And then in later years on various teams and in various situations, I snapped the ball to Bob Greasy, Dan Pastorini, James Harris, Darryl LaMonica, Lynn Dawson, Francis Tarkington, Bill Wade. It sounds like a lie because it's almost impossible to believe that one guy could have the privilege of not only of conveying the football, but of defending that many great, because not only are those incredible quarterbacks great athletes and great players, almost all of them are great human beings, almost all of them. And it was such a privilege, but that's the list. And I'm still leaving some off, I'm sure.
That's quite the list, Coach. Yeah, that's incredible. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap this incredible session up? If anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And once again, guys, if you haven't read his book, definitely check it out. And if you have any questions about it, you can reach out to me, or I'm sure you can reach out to Coach and ask in regards to it. But here's a question for you, Coach. You're taking over a program. What are your initial words to that group when you meet with them for the first time?
I love you. And my goal is for you to learn to love each other, and that's gonna take supreme effort because there's some really ugly guys in this room. But I'm dead serious. I hope 25 years from now, when you get together, you'll look each other in the eye and you won't have to say anything, but you'll just know that you paid a price, and you were in combat together, and you learn to respect and love one another regardless of your differences. That can change America.
Absolutely. Well, that's why, as coaches, we have a very important job and a lot of responsibility, and the influence that we have is tremendous when used in the right way. So if anybody else has any questions, man, we'll wrap this one up. And once again, Coach, just can't thank you enough for taking the time out this morning and giving such a powerful presentation. The wisdom being shared was I don't know, I don't even really have words for it. It was incredible. And if you could see the chat, I mean the sentiments and just like all the positive responses and remarks about the presentation is awesome, and rightfully so. So everybody I know that was involved in this talk, and everybody that's watching and all that, got such a, I mean, that's the way to start a morning off. That's definitely the way to start the day. And honestly, I think I speak for everybody in here. We can't thank you enough for that.
Well, thank you, Justin. And it's been an honor to be on with you, and anything I can do to help, I'll be glad to.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Coach.